Welcome on into Morning Kickaround. One of the big changes being circulated in American soccer is a possible change for MLS to go to the Euro calendar. And Don Garber earlier in the year kind of teased that they were still considering this in Major League Soccer. And our guest now, Jeremiah Oshan from Sounder at Heart, spurred a little bit of conversation regarding something that he heard, saying that this is back in the cards and there's some bigger discussion happening this week on this very topic.
Jeremiah, I'm showing the post you put on Blue Sky. So what you say here that we've probably heard about the Board of Governors meeting. If you're a super nerd, you have. If you're not,
yeah, I guess I kind of assumed a lot of like baseline knowledge that's pretty insidery stuff. But go ahead.
Yeah. Right. And then it says your understanding is that there's no way it happens in 2026, which of course is a World Cup year and kind of makes sense for a reset, but also is a heavy lift because of the timeline. But there's a very real possibility it could happen in 2027. That seems this. Okay, I'll go back to the word that Don Garber used in July when he talked about this. Seismic, right? This could be seismic for Major League Soccer.
Yeah, I mean, in almost a literal sense in the way that it sort of shifts the ground underneath which MLS is on, right? Like and I do think that's one of the things that has maybe been lost in this discussion a little bit is this is much more of a shift than it is a formal change. Like they're almost flipping the schedule around to be opposite of what it is, meaning that instead of the season ending in winter, it's going to sort of start in winter, right? It would start in spring. And right. I mean, that's my point is that a lot of the games are going to be happening at the same time that they're happening now. It's just the end of the season is going to be in spring, summer, and the beginning of the season will be, or like a big chunk of the season will be during winter.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, so off of this post that we've already shown, you had a long discussion, many different people in your mentions over this. Some pro,
I think all from Minnesota.
And some con, yeah, there was some.
Why would Minnesota be opposed to this kind of change?
That's right. At one point,
right?
They do basically have hamster tubes to move around in the wintertime because it's so damn cold. So I mean, they're conditioned to think, how could you possibly play soccer? I saw at one point, I think West Burdine sent you a map, like literally sent you a map of like average temperatures in certain parts of the year
for sure.
Yeah, and so look, I think the initial reaction is kind of understandable. Oh my God, they're going to play through the winter. How could they do that? But the devil is in the details, and I guess that's the thing. Is so much of this is still speculation in terms of how MLS actually executes this plan.
Yeah, and I think that's stuff that's still TBD, but I think one thing we can assume, like, okay, this is one of the things that I think I've gotten hung up on, and I have sort of debated with people, is that people talk about how, okay, well, like one person told me we can't play soccer in Minnesota from Thanksgiving until the end of February. And I said, well, I have bad news for you. We do play soccer between those times now because MLS Cup, I know you like, and I'm not trying to be pithy here, but the reality is that MLS Cup is in December and Champions League starts in early February. That's not, that's the reality. So if you are in those tournaments, you don't get to get out of them.
Yeah, I guess what Minnesota United fans are saying is if they finish first over, if they win the Supporter Shield and they have home field advantage, when we get to MLS Cup, they'll be like, no, it's too cold here. Let's go play somewhere else. They'll happily give up home field advantage, right?
Right, exactly. Well, like, I think one of the funny things is that this week is it's nice that this happened. So the Canadian Premier League played the championship game in a snowstorm, like an almost unplayable snowstorm. And people keep pointing to this going like, and this is what you want to play through? And I said, we are playing our MLS playoffs right now. Do you want the playoffs to be in this kind of weather, or do you want the middle of the season to be played in this kind of weather? Because this is the reality, is that North America is an enormous continent. And whether we're playing in this, there's going to be bad weather no matter what schedule we pick. Unless we go back to like the OG MLS schedule. Well, actually, we would play in the summer still. But you go back to the OG MLS schedule where there was only like 6-month long season, you might be able to avoid some of this. But we're playing 10 months a year no matter what.
So to take a step back, the proposition on the table that's being discussed is change it to European calendar, starting in late August and then ending in late spring, rather than starting at the very beginning of spring and running to the beginning of the winter. So we're hearing a lot of cons about wintry, cold climates and team markets. What are the plus sides? Why does Major League Soccer? Why are they entertaining this, and why now?
Okay, so I think there's a few things here, and then these things get sort of glossed over that are real benefits. Now, whether they counteract them, I'm not necessarily giving a subjective opinion on, but the main benefits are that the transfer windows line up. And so the idea is that we will be able to get better play. So one of the things that lots of CSOs are asserting right now is that they are missing out on the second or third best player on good teams because their team isn't willing to let them go in the middle of their season. Whereas if our off season was lining up with their off season, it would be a lot easier to let these players go because they could replace them more readily. Right? So this is a money problem. This is a thing where if MLS is willing to spend the money to bring in these types of players, they can get them in this new calendar. That's the thinking. So you're going to raise the level of talent that is coming into MLS. It's going to raise the profile of the league, all these things. Then there's the secondary part of that, which is it makes it easier to sell players if your windows are lining up. So all of a sudden, like let's take the Sounders. They're trying to sell Obed Vargas. Well, they don't really want to sell Obed Vargas in the summer, which is when everyone wants to buy him. They would much rather sell him in the winter. What the winter market is going to be, diminished, and it's going to be tougher to sell him in the winter. But it makes sense for the Sounders, right? But so that streamlines the transfer incoming and outgoing elements. The idea being that there's going to be more money coming in and it's going to be easier to spend money going out. Okay, so that's one part of it. Then the other part of it is the actual calendar. So instead of playing our most important games in the worst weather parts of the year, meaning November, December, we're going to move our best game where they're also, by the way, competing with the NFL, where they're competing with college football, where they're kind of competing with baseball at the early part of the playoffs as well. So you have all this competition with the biggest sports in the country at our most important part of the season, which is November, December. So what if we flip that? What if the most important parts of our season were being played in April and May, where we're not competing with football at all, where we're now competing with like the NBA, the NHL, and obviously there's still competition. There's no way to get out of some competition, but you're not competing with the behemoths of, like I said, the NFL, college football.
Well, look, yeah, the obviously the thing you have to kind of get to, and for some people it takes a little bit longer to get there, but the thing you have to get to is Major League Soccer is competing with those things no matter what.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter when the calendar is happening, and again, I mean, I've seen the argument in your mentions. Why would you want to go up against the NFL during the regular season? Well, why would you want to go up against them during your playoffs? Like it's
right.
Like which one is for you more important? I think that, that idea that we're going to have a dip in attendance because there will be games that are played in relatively cold, certainly colder weather than they're played now during the regular season. But again, one of the other things about the weather here is while you're always going to have heat in certain parts of the country, Jeremiah, there's obviously an issue with 100-degree weather happening across the country during the summer when Major League Soccer is playing the bulk of its games. And you end up with also how many games were delayed for thunderstorms?
That is another very good point. Are we going to have I guess the question that they are going to be asking is, are we going to have more games delayed for snow than we would have, that we're already getting delayed for thunderstorms and lightning storms, and how many and how much of a problem is the heat in places like Texas? And it's easy to say, well, we have 10, let's call it 10 teams in northern markets who can't play in the winter. Well, how much longer are we going to go before we have 10 teams in southern markets that can't play in the summer? I mean, that's a reality.
Obviously, one of the responses to that would be, well, it's much easier to it's not easy to play in heat though, but in terms of the facilities you have, in terms of sort of how you maybe you have facilities that are sort of made to play soccer in the summer, and maybe there's cooling elements and those kind of things. What about winterizing essentially some of these places where even not even the cold weather northern climates, but some of the other ones that may have some winter weather issues. Like, if you don't have heated pitches, are you going to be delayed because pitches are frozen? I think there are questions around that.
There absolutely are questions about that. And those are things that MLS owners are going to have to decide that they need to invest in, right? Like, if we're going to be playing more games in the winter, more teams are going to have to invest in underground heating. That's a reality. More teams are going to have to find indoor training facilities. That's a reality. Now, these are the trade-offs that presumably the MLS owners are going to be debating and discussing and having to figure out. But these are all things that I think, and from my perspective, are solvable problems. There is nothing impossible about winterizing the league. Now, there are probably 6 weeks in the season that are going to be impossible to play through. And I suspect that we will have a lengthy winter break that accommodates things. And if they don't, then we're crazy and we shouldn't be doing it.
I hope this isn't a curveball, but the third alternative to a calendar change is what they do in places like Mexico. They play in the spring and in the fall, kind of splitting or avoiding the harsh winters and harsh summers. So, excuse me, but my question is, but does that kind of calendar interfere with that player exchange? Does that put them off timing to have players incoming, outgoing? From Mexico.
Does it affect?
Well,
does that affect incoming outgoings?
Well, I don't think it creates a hindrance, because both seasons, they're complete seasons that they play. So it's not like they're playing two halves of 1 year. They're playing two distinct seasons that have a distinct champion. So there's nothing that stops MLS from going to that. And I suppose that might be one of the considerations. I have not heard as many discussions about an Apertura Clausura kind of arrangement, but you're right. That is a perfectly viable way of sort of skinning the cat a different way.
I think so. A lot of this reaction that we're seeing, and is it representative of the entire fan base? I mean, that's really difficult to know. I mean, I'm sure MLS has done, in fact, surveys are out, and we've had people that are ultras, that are members, tell us that, hey, I've been asked about this. This seems like it's coming because I've seen it in the survey materials that Major League Soccer has sent out to its fans. But I think a lot of the reaction is just based on this not weird, but the innate American vibe of Major League Soccer, and then our American sensibilities about what sports is supposed to look like. And it's not so much about when the league is happening, all the weather and all that is on the table. But it's just, again, like if you said, let's split the season Apertura Clausura, we don't have a history of doing that. Minor League Baseball has done that, but people don't think of minor league baseball as serious enough competition to care too much about the format. So if you do something like that, it is going to be a shock to the system. But then again, so would a protracted break in the middle of the season, Jeremiah. So, I mean, your thoughts on the idea of like taking a month and a half or 2 months, perhaps even off, to get out of the way of some of that winter weather. What does that do to the quote unquote momentum of a season?
Well, I think my theory is that they're going to, I think one interesting way of doing it would be to sort of so, we're getting at a point now where we can't play a good round robin, right? And so I think that there's ways that you could probably do a split schedule where you have sort of like a upper tier and a lower tier, where you play for the first half of the season to be in one half of the league, and the second half of the season is in the another half of the league, and you sort of rotate who you're playing. Like, there's creative ways to sort of balance that so that there feels like there's a real distinction between the first half and the second half of the season. I also suspect that there's going to have to be some sort of tournament that gets played during that. We could see like an MLS's back style tournament that gets played between the two halves of the season, maybe in a warm weather place where, all the team, where you can put, maybe that's what Leagues Cup becomes, where it's like a single location type of thing. I don't, these are things that I'm speculating about, and I've read speculate. I don't think I'm creating any of this from my own creativity.
It's not just a Jeremiah Oshan production. This is there's exactly. Kind of
this is like bits and pieces of things that I've heard.
Yeah. But okay. So one thing that is not speculation, one thing that has been said again by Garber going back 3 months, but as this comes back around with the end of season Board of Governors meeting, is he said that they're looking at completely overhauling roster rules, overhauling the way they think about rosters. Now, there is some, wow, that's really interesting. I've been waiting for something like that for a long time. That seems to me like it's connected. It's part and parcel of the calendar switch. If they're going to do one, the other one probably comes along with it in some way.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the biggest things is that the biggest mistake MLS could make is thinking that they can make this change without overhauling the way that they do business. Because if they go into this thinking like, well, we can just sell players for more money and that'll take care of itself, that's crazy. Like the only reason to do this is that because so MLS right now, depending on how you want to debate it, is somewhere between the 10th and 20th best league in the world, right? That doesn't really move the needle for the average American fan in terms of quality. Like the league is better now than it was 5 years ago. I think most people would agree. But to really break through, I think, to the American consciousness, and this isn't just to the casual, this is not to like the casual NFL fan, but this is to the fan that is otherwise supporting that's watching Champions League at 11 a.m. on Wednesday every week or 8 a.m. on, you know what I mean? And it's like to get their attention, you got to be pushing for like we can make a credible argument that we're better than France, that we're better than Italy, that we're better than some of these other like we're not, you know, I'm not saying that MLS is going to get to be Champions League quality. They probably aren't going to be EPL quality or even Bundesliga quality, but why can't it aspire to be a top 5-6 league in the world? And the way to get there is by making big investments in talent. And the way to get that talent is just like, this is a step in that direction, right?
Yeah. You know, something else I want to relate from the reporting in July is, I believe it was from The Athletic. I want to properly credit this, but somebody did a straw poll, which of course is just basically testing the waters. And their reporting was 27 of 30 MLS owners were on board with the calendar switch. I mean, if that's true, it's going to happen. I mean, Don Garber is simply the voice of the collective will of the owners at that point. And to relate it to something else seismic that might be happening in American soccer, we weren't sure that there was really any heat to the idea of pro rel in USL until it became clear that the owners were backing it. If 27 of 30 owners in Major League Soccer are saying, yes, we want to change this calendar, that seems to indicate what you're talking about, that they see this as necessary to continue to grow to the level of their ambition.
Right. I think that's sort of the thing. Like I was, you know, one of the things that people were throwing around was like, well, I hope Minnesota sues if they do this. Well, I would assume Minnesota is going to be on board with, like, I think that part of the process here and part of why it hasn't happened quicker is because it's taken a lot to get virtually everyone on board, because that's kind of what they need. They can't have 4 or 5 owners saying this is the worst thing we could have done. You're killing our team. Because that's sort of undermining the whole project. And so my assumption is that if it's not literally 30 of 30 owners, that it's something like you said, like 27 of the owners who want to make this happen. And that's going to include a lot of these northern market teams, you know, the team, you know, presumably a team like Colorado, a team like Real Salt Lake, you know, teams like Chicago, you know, go down the list. And I would think that the only way it happens is if they are assured that this is going to benefit them ultimately in the long